welcome everybody that's coming in. We will get started in just a few minutes. All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Kyle Foster and I'm a staff member for the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education, and I will be moderating today's session, which if you are not aware, is Planning the Trip with Dr. Dana Lindon-Burgett. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to talk with you about, and I'm sure we'll have some other folks coming into the webinar as we get started, which is just fine. So if you've attended other sessions, you heard me mention all this before, but listening with your computer audio will give you the best experience for today's webinar. So if you're not connected using your computer speakers, that's what I would advise doing to get the best quality of audio. Type your questions for today's session in the Q&A box. You'll notice it at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be keeping track of those. And Dr. Lindon-Burgett will be answering questions as we go, and I'll be helping her with that. If you're watching live on Facebook, please feel free to type your comments as a question, or your questions as a comment on this post, and we can answer those as well. This session will be recorded, just like all of our summit sessions, so you'll have access to this later on, as well as the ability to send this to colleagues who might find it of use. So please feel free to share that far and wide. All of the recordings are posted on the summit website, which is onlineexcellence.onenet.net. The other thing that I would like to mention before we begin is a big congratulations to the winners of our 2019 Oklahoma Online Learning Excellence Awards. These are awards that we do on an annual basis. The recipients are chosen by a committee of colleagues, and we have some outstanding work going on in the online space in Oklahoma, and we are happy to recognize that. So these folks will be formally awarded at the April State Regents meeting. The Teaching Award winner for 2019 is Professor Don M. Pierce from the University of Central Oklahoma. The Institute for Learning Environment Design, also at UCO, takes the Innovation Award for 2019. And the Leadership Individual Award goes to Marcy Grant, who is at Southwestern Oklahoma State University. So those folks are doing great things in the online space. And if you know them, be sure to give them a congratulations on this well-deserved accolade. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dr. Dana Lindon-Burgett. She is the Associate Dean and LMA Administrator in the E-Learning and Academic Outreach Division at Rose State College, and she has been doing a lot with online in Oklahoma, especially through Cole. She's been involved in that for a long time, and she's an expert in her field, and we're really fortunate to have her to talk about course objectives today. So with that, Dana, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. So Kyle has offered to help watch the chat for us, and but the way I kind of like to conduct a session is just to make it as casual as we can. It's about what you want to learn and where you have questions, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about alignment today, which I used the title Planning the Trip. It must have been around spring break and I was kind of ready for vacation, but I really kind of do think of alignment as helping us know and navigate. So I just used the trip analogy just to make it a little bit more interesting and easier to understand. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to flip over to a whiteboard. And in this session, kind of the way I think about, I'm probably need to turn off my camera here for you because it's going to. So the way I think about the alignment is so many times we think of alignment as the foundation for the course, and it is the foundation for the course. Everything builds, or learning objectives and course objectives are the foundation for the course, and they help drive everything that we do in a course. But I'm going to kind of flip it around. Instead of thinking about the course objectives as being just the foundation at the bottom, I'm going to put the course objectives at the top, because this is going to be where we want to go. This is our destination. And this is where we want the students to end up. So our students may start at a lower end, or when they first start the course, obviously they don't know anything that we're teaching yet, although some of them get frustrated because when we present a concept and they don't know it, they don't understand why, and it's like, well, we haven't covered it yet. So let's say they started at the beginning, and this is where we want to go. And often the course objectives are set and mandated by the institution, and that's fine. Sometimes there's an outside accrediting body that has to set the course objectives, but this is where our institution, our program, our department says that we need to be at the end of the course. This is where we need to take students. I use the analogy of a trip because the instructor gets to plan the journey. So I think of a journey as different stops along the way. And this is what the instructor kind of gets to plan. And these end up being our modules. This might be module number 1, number 2, number 3. And all these modules are going to take the student along the way and help them reach that journey and that destination. They all fit together, but these are all within the instructor's control. And so this is what we need to do in order to support the objective and to reach that destination. So the instructor plans the trip, but it's the student that takes the journey. So getting this all together and helping us reach that destination is what alignment is all about. So let me go ahead and kind of jump right into how we might begin alignment. Well, no, let me jump over here and let's just talk about course objectives first. We have to kind of, if we're going to begin a journey, we've got to think about what are those objectives. Now, I noticed several people on the list, and some people may be watching may be very familiar with developing course objectives and how to write a course objective, but you can't talk about alignment without mentioning your course objectives first. So a learning objective, whether it be a course level learning objective or a module level learning objectives, answers the question, kind of, what do we want the students to know? What do we want them to be able to do at the end of the course? And it can be at the end of the course if it's a course level objective, or the module if it's a module level objective. So either way, depending on the level objective, that's what we want the students to be able to do at the end. The course objectives need to have three things. They need to be specific to the concepts of the course or module. They need to have action verbs that describes what the learner will end up doing. And they need to include observable behavior. That can be tricky for some because observable behavior is something that you can see either through the student's work or directly if they're doing some type of a performance that you can evaluate, such as a speech, first aid steps, etc. Or you need to be able to observe their level of mastery through a paper or through a discussion or through some type of a quiz or exam or something. But you have to have something that you can observe, and that can be tricky. So even though we have an action verb, we still need observable behavior. So let me kind of move on down here and talk about what makes a verb an action verb. So I'm sure many of you have heard about Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy uses action verbs or stresses the use of action verbs. It's about creating a learning pathway or understanding the cognitive level of development that we want the students to achieve. And that cognitive development could be different if it's, at the end of the course or if it's through a module. The cognitive level of development could also be different depending on the level of course. Although there can be growth in every course, an intro, for example, an introductory course or even like a survey course, you don't have to stay at just the lower levels. They can still move up and be able to analyze. They're just not going to analyze quite as deeply as they would in a more advanced course that has better foundation for them. But this kind of helps show where how Bloom's taxonomy and where we want our action verbs to come from depends on the cognitive level of development that we want from our students. Now, I got this slide from the Vanderbilt University Center for Teaching. I thought the slide was very good because it also explained kind of what these levels of development are. Learning may not be linear like this, but it still lets you know what the levels of development are. One thing that I've noticed is that some people don't completely understand when we talk about the different levels and how they transition. One of the things that can be hard is that if we have an action verb in our course that is at this level, if all of our activities are at this level, we're not achieving our outcome. The other aspect that I find that can be confusing for faculty is that, especially when you're working on alignment, is the fact that this level of objective up here is still going to fulfill the lower level of objectives. So if a student or a learner can explain, compare, and contrast, then this is assuming at this cognitive level of development, they can also explain it. So these kind of build, so the lower levels build up, but it doesn't work in reverse. A student that can explain something, it doesn't mean that they can then differentiate something. And this will come into play a little bit later as we go through some more concepts, but I just kind of wanted to kind of clarify a little bit about blooms and how that fits in. There is more than one way to think about learning, but this is one of the best ways when you're writing a learning objective to make sure that your action verbs in your learning objective really reflect what you want your students to be able to do. Here's a chart. I created this a few years ago, and I did look at several different charts and graphs, so I can't create credit for the concept in general, but this is some work that I did, and it's helped our faculty. But I kind of use this level to explain the different concepts and what they are and how they feed into another. So understanding would be able to explain. Applying, they use that same information that they gained when they were learning how to understand and explain, but now they're applying it to other situations. When they move on up to analyzing, now they're taking the ability to apply it in other situations to being able to draw connections or look at more underlying concepts. Then they move up to being able to evaluate. It's just a little bit deeper understanding where they're able to use different information and different criteria to be able to make a decision about something, possibly a judgment or some type of appraisal. And then the very last component over here really is about creating. It's taking all the parts and being able to create original work. It's not just about being able to replicate something, but actually creating something. And these are the different types of assignments that could be done to support the action verbs that are down below. And I will share this document at the end of the presentation. But that's this shows a little bit about how we grow in our understanding and why we call these higher order thinking. So these are higher order processes that the more right you get to this screen, and these are more lower order. Both are often needed in a course. I think of the lower order objectives as something where you're introducing new material, new concepts. Sometimes even in an advanced level course, sometimes you've still got to start with some lower order activities and learning objectives in order to scaffold them so that they can then reach the higher order learning objectives by the end of the session. So I hope that's helpful. That's the best way I can think of to understand that process of how the cognitive development takes place within a learning environment. So let's take a look a little bit about learning objectives. And this session isn't just about learning objectives, but again, we're not going to be able to go forward with alignment or a concept map unless we know that we have well-crafted, measurable learning objectives. So what we've got here is an example. This one, a student will demonstrate knowledge. While demonstrate may be an action verb, knowledge is an internal process. As a result, we can't see it. So this is not measurable. The student still has to do something, whatever this demonstration is going to be, to let us know that they have the knowledge. So instead of using the term demonstrate with an internal process, go ahead and describe the action that you're going to have them do. So in this case, we want students to be able to identify and describe. So in this case, we've taken that action verb, or we've taken this action verb that really didn't apply to the internal process and made it specific and measurable. So now we can assess this. We can assess identification with the multiple choice quiz. We can assess it with any type of discussion. Lower level learning activities will do this, along with discussions, papers, etc., essay. Anything along will do that. We can know whether or not the student can identify these elements. And then we can ask some type of an essay question. And this might be an essay question. It could be a discussion. It could be a paper. Anything that the student is asked to describe. Now, you may notice that I didn't mention like a multiple choice question. A multiple choice question doesn't have the student describing anything. So a multiple choice question would not assess this part of it. It might assess this part, but not the other part. Down below, we talked to, this one was using the terminology that the students will learn. The question then comes up, well, how do we know that the students have learned? In this case, I've taken that a little bit further, and I want the students to be able to analyze, and they are going to determine which of the Erikson social crises were in a couple of case studies that they were reading. You'll notice that this learning objective also combines what's called a condition. A condition's a great idea if you need it in order to add clarity. So I needed to be able to describe what they're going to analyze, because just to be able to analyze a developmental stage is too broad. It's not specific enough, and it's probably not realistic just in a classroom. You know, you've got to be able to have something to where you could see, in this case, like a lifespan. So I needed to provide a condition in order to make it a little bit more specific. But this still has the action that the student is going to do and the performance that we want them to be able to do at the end of the course. Another thing that you might notice is that this objective up here might be a good example of a course objective. It's a little bit higher level. So this could work for a course objective. And this one, because it gets down to specifically how it's going to be done, might be a module level objective. And this module level objective is definitely supporting this course objective, because it's taking one of Erikson's theories, not both of them, but it is still supporting the course objective in this case. So that's how the conditions of how you know if you've got a specific or a well-written learning objective is that it will be specific. It's going to be measurable, and it's going to help guide the students as far as what they will be able to do by the end of the course, and it will guide the instructor on what types of materials they're going to need and what type of learning that they're going to need throughout the course. Okay. I'd like to pause for just a second, sorry if this is confusing, and just ask what type of questions do you have at this point? I've kind of just gone through the objectives, learning objectives, are there any specific questions or anything that anybody has about learning objectives, how to create learning objectives, how to identify whether or not they're specific or not? I'd be happy to pause for a second and let you guys ask questions.
Okay, looks like we have a question. Is it okay to use 2 verbs per objective?
You'll notice that I have that in some of my cases. I've seen it both ways. If you're a purist, you would not do that. You would have specific learning objectives for each action. You wouldn't necessarily combine them. From my perspective, some of the learning objectives, you can have more than one. It does make it harder. If you have more than one action verb, it makes it a little bit harder to know that you're fully aligned, or you have to watch for both of those in your alignment. If you have more than one learning objective, you may have to have multiple assignments to meet that learning objective. But there are quite a few seminars that I've been to. I've read a lot of different books, and some people, they call it a compound objective if it has more than one verb. But I've seen several well-written learning objectives that do have more than one verb and action verb, and they are still measurable. I don't know if that helps or not. Okay. No other questions?
No, we don't have any open questions at the moment.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start talking a little bit more. Let me share my screen again. And get out of this one. And I'm going to talk about alignment and a little bit about how we build alignment. So let me turn off my camera. So when we're looking at alignment, obviously we're looking at the very first step of alignment is to make sure that your module is supporting your course objectives. So your course learning objectives are often going to be, they're still going to be measurable, and they're still going to be observable behavior. But they're going to be broader than the module level objectives. They're going to cover, they are for the course. So there may be 6 to 8 in some courses, depending on the course. I come from, more of, I teach psychology and some computer classes. I've got a colleague that teaches science classes, and they are often a little bit more specific even at the course level, because what the course level objectives do is that no matter who teaches that course, and they can teach it however they want to, but they have to meet the course learning objectives. So if you have something very specific that must be taught or must be achieved, it needs to be in the course learning objective. So if I teach an introduction to psychology course, there has to be a learning objective over lifespan development or human development, because we cannot skip that chapter, because the next levels of courses above the intro to psych course are developmental courses. So that always has to be one of our course objectives. So the course objectives are going to be a little bit broader. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these could be institutionally mandated. And that could be either through, like I said, mandated, helps if I can spell. This could be an outside accrediting body. Our nursing department has an outside body that they're accountable to. We have a child development program that also has an outside accrediting body. That they could, again, often they are determined at the institution at some level, either through the department or the program that says, okay, these objectives are for this course. So one of the challenges that we have with the module learning objectives and making sure that they're aligned, times when they're institutionally mandated, the measurability part just isn't there. But we can't change them. So that leaves the instructor, which often can determine their own module level objectives. This is usually where academic freedom comes into play, as far as you've got the course objectives you've got to meet, but you get to decide how you get there with your module level objectives. Well, if these are not measurable, then you still have to find a way to try to support them. So you're going to take the general concepts. You still want your module objectives. You're going to still be measurable, even though the course level objectives may not be. Well, it helps. Again, I can't write here. Let's see here. Okay, you still want them. They're going to actually be a little bit more specific. And these are going to be often developed at the instructor's level. Okay, now in order to support the course objectives, they can either do so directly, such as the example that I had above, when it was very clear that Erickson's component in the module objective was supporting the higher level course objective, but you can also support them indirectly. So if you've had to create your own learning objectives, you want to make sure that they're aligned probably by concept. So if the course level objectives are not measurable, and let's say it's something like the students will understand the concepts of CPR. Okay, understand is not a measurable action verb, but you can then create a module level objective that supports that by maybe saying the students will demonstrate the steps of CPR using a lifelike dummy in class or something like that. So that is still supporting that. The other element, in addition to the trying to work with a course level learning objective that may not be measurable, is also some situations I've run into, and this is especially true for some introductory courses, is that the course level learning objectives all have a very low level learning. They don't get to much higher. They're often use action verbs such as identify, recognize, describe, and they're not very high level thinking. So you can indirectly measure those. You might have higher order objectives, action verbs. So in the case that I mentioned earlier about how the course learning objective might say, identify the steps of CPR, your course level learning objectives may actually have them demonstrate the steps of CPR. So you're going to take that even further. Rather than just having them identify the steps, which is a lower level learning objective on a multiple choice test, you want them to apply it and demonstrate a little bit more of what they've learned. So you're going to make that a little bit higher order learning objective. That still fulfills that course level objective, but it's just taking it at a higher level. The other thing that you can do is, as we build our modules, sometimes it may take 2 or 3 modules before we hit that course learning objective. So you can start with a lower level learning objective at the module level and kind of use it for scaffolding. And I'll show you a little bit more about what that means as we go forward. So one of the things I was talking about with scaffolding is that if all of your learning objectives are down in this area, or I'm sorry, not scaffolding, but going for a higher level learning objective, if all your action verbs are in this area, you can go ahead, if you want your students to be able to compare and contrast, you can go ahead at the module level and do that and have a module level like this, because this will fulfill this requirement too. So in that way, you are supporting this. You're actually supporting it and taking it a few steps further. Now, where this is tricky is it doesn't work, like I mentioned earlier, it does not work the other way around. So if your learning objective your course level learning objective asks the students to be able to analyze, you can't just have activities that are down in this area or you won't meet that learning objective. So you have to at least be at the level of the cognitive processes that the course level learning objective is. You can be beyond it, but you can't be below it and still meet that, the course level learning objectives, unless it's part of scaffolding. So when I talk about scaffolding, I'm talking about how you might have one module, the first module might ask your students to list or identify. The second module that you do might ask the students to be able to discuss. And then the third module is the one where you actually meet that course level objective. So you can scaffold your learner. So the last kind of thing I want to talk about as we're talking about alignment has to do with how do we know we're aligned, we're within alignment. And this begins with some of the key parts of alignment have to do just to make sure our module objectives are meeting our course level objectives. This is the first part of an alignment. It's also the first part of a course map. So once you've got your learning objectives at the course level, you can write them in, and I'll share this chart. This is just from an Excel chart. So you would want to make sure that all of your learning objectives are listed. And like I said, there could be 6 to 8, there may be more than that. And then within each unit, you can mark your module level objectives. Now you might meet, you're not going to meet all of the course objectives in each module. You don't have to. What you do want to make sure is that by the end of the course, if you've got 6 units down, you want to make sure every one of these are met at some point at the mastery level. So I might have a formative activity here. Let's see. Change that. A formative activity, oh, I'm sorry, that's just 2 down here. with a mastery level one up there. And by the end of this block, by the end of the course, or to make sure you've got this part all aligned, you want to make sure that every course objective has a mastery at some point in the content. You can create a basic, maybe that's done at the basic level there. If you wanted to add a basic, perhaps it's just a multiple choice reading quiz, and then you provide a couple of formative activities for that learning objective, and then you have a mastery level one in that unit. So this course objective in this case would not be met until they got to that last module objective in that unit. It wouldn't be met with unit 1, but it is met in unit 2. There can be multiple units that address that one objective as well. So this is the first level of a course map, and that's just making sure that in your course, every single module objective is met at some place. So that means if you have a course module objective that asks the student to be able to analyze a particular concept, you might have those basic unit objectives at some point that asks them to identify. You may even have one that asks them to be able to discuss. And then in module 3, then you check your mastery where they're analyzing. But at some point, they've got to meet that learning objective up here. So that's that first level of alignment. This is just getting the course map down and getting the module level objectives and the course level objectives mapped to where you're comfortable. Can I stop here also to ask if there are any questions? And this is just the first level of a map, I understand. But I do want to make sure that that makes sense, because the next screen we're going to go ahead and go into additional concept maps or course mapping. Okay. No questions there. Let me go ahead and go back. Okay. At this point, we're going to go ahead and create.
Dana.
Yes.
We did have one question come across. If you want to.
Sure.
So each CLO should have a mastery assignment, correct? Should each MLO also have a mastery assessment, or is a formative assessment enough?
For a module level objective, they may not have a mastery level assessment, because that module objective may only be to help them identify something. There is going to be some. Well, let me clarify. There is going to be some form of assessment, but they may not. So if you're thinking about that as a mastery, that may be true. But let me think of how to describe that. The module level objective would still be assessed at some point. When I think of mastery, I typically think of mastering a concept or mastering a higher order objective. But no, let's see. I'm just trying to think of how to describe that. We will still be assessing all of the course level, all of the module level objectives. I just don't map it out as like that the same way as I do the course, because when I think about the module objectives, I think about building toward the course level objectives. And I use a different type of mapping for the module rather than determining it. Because if you tried it, you could take that same map and break it down by activities and which ones are mastered. That is correct. So you could have a reading activity that introduces it, and then you can assess whether or not they've been able to identify or describe the lower level objectives. So yeah, I think you are correct. I know I kind of talked myself in a circle right there. I just trying to think about those different ways. I don't map to that level of detail using that same format. And I'll kind of show you a little bit more about what I do here. Can I clarify that further? I don't feel like I did a really good job answering that response.
I think if you want to move forward, we can come back to it if we need additional clarification, if that works for you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of the things that when we're looking at course level objectives, so if once I've got that, the big chart mapped, and I know that I've touched on every one of the course level objectives, then I'm going to do something that's called a module map. This is actually, course maps can be very detailed, and because you're dealing with so many different objectives all at once. So what I like to do is just make sure all of my course level objectives are met at some point throughout the course, and then I like to go to my module map. So the very first thing on my module map, I am going to put, this is within a course. So you'll notice I don't have 1 through 9 on here. I've just got the 4 course objectives that this module is addressing. I've got it to where it can, it's got to define and identify. They're all measurable, and they're all specific. So these are ready to go. This is what I'm going to address in my course. So then if I take the course level objectives and then I build onto them. So I've got the course level objectives numbered up here, and then my module level objectives are written over here. And you'll notice that this is a good example of where I have taken like a discuss instead of just a describe. Although I do have a describe, I do have an identify. So this level of objective here, and then what I've got over here is I've got the course level objectives that it goes with. So apply the major principles of classical conditioning, and this is what addressing this one of them. So this is to, although this is to define, this gets identify the major perspectives in school and behavior. So when I'm identifying that, I'm still doing that down here. It also helps me number 3, which is actually, we talk about some research in this unit. So that also fulfills that chapter as part of that learning objective. And then they're going to describe the parts of learning, which is 8. So this one fulfills all 3 of these. So not only am I looking at the action verb, but I'm also looking at the behavior that they're asked to do to know that that is aligned, and that is what that one is fulfilling. So what I've done is I've taken although this is a describe action verb, I'm taking it to a higher level and asking them to apply. So I am still fulfilling that, or that action verb is still supporting the course objective for number 8, because they can describe as well as apply. But then there's going to be other assignments along the way too. So we've got this one as asked for the various types of memory. So this objective, and this objective all deal with different stages of memory. And each one of these I've put behind there which course objective that it meets. That's just for ease. If otherwise the charter graph gets too big and it's a little bit harder to map over. So once I have the course objectives, I can, hold on. Now I can't get that big. So once you know that your course objectives are all mapped and they're all fulfilled within that module that you're working on, the rest of the activities you really don't have to keep going back to the course objectives. If you know that all your module level objectives are met at some point in the course, when you actually get down to building your module objective, it is you don't have to keep going, or once you've done your module objectives and stuff, to when you get ready to map over your learning activities and assessments, you no longer need to keep going back to those course objectives because you know they're met. Just make sure your learning activities and assessments are meeting those module level objectives. So for this module map, I've taken these activities to make sure that they're all met at some point. So for this one here, module objective number 1 is met through this assignment. I know that they've got reading activities, they've got videos. Each one of these has multiple choice self-check quizzes. So they help meet the objective of number 2 and number 6. And then they also provide the foundation for the remaining module objectives. So even though it doesn't necessarily directly help meet module objective number 3, I've seen some people think, well, it's not aligned then. As long as someplace they're discussing this multiple choice assessment can be what's used to scaffold that learning. So when you're scaffolding, you're introducing a topic, it's giving them a place to check to make sure they're progressing, and I'm introducing new concepts. So before we get to the stage where we can discuss, I want to make sure that they're understanding the concepts and being able to identify those. I think that goes back to a little bit of the question that we had earlier, and that is that my module objective is still going to be assessed, but in some cases I can have an activity that is not necessarily directly fulfilling a module level objective, but at some point I still do have to show mastery of that module, so that would be correct. So in this section, I am then going on, there's a discussion, and this is the discussion on memory that fulfills that. This is where they're analyzing, and then this is a case study. So those are all the assessments along with this multiple choice that are fulfilling these objectives up here. So once the learning objectives are mapped, you know that your learning activities are there. You've got adequate learning activities. What you're trying to ask yourself in this situation is, why am I asking the learner to do this? And that would help you know, well, I'm asking them to do this case study because that's going to help them be able to identify and describe different types of memory distortion. And then I'm gonna have them write about it. But that's the reason I have that case study, is because that case study does have quite a bit of memory distortions, example of different distorted memories, etc., which would fulfill one of my learning objectives. In addition, it also helps with module objective number 3, because that deals with memory failure. So it's helping to fulfill more than one of my module objectives, but not necessarily all of them, and that's okay. So once I know I've got plenty of learning activities and assessments, then the next piece is fairly simple, and that has to do with the materials and tools. So think about all the materials that you've got to support that learning objectives or that module, and all the learning objectives in your module. In this case, I've got 2 chapters. I provide videos. I use the quizzing tool. I use a discussion tool. I use an assignment submission. So that's one of the last pieces of a module map. So here's the whole module map. I've got it coded at the top, which, so the module map shares what the relationship is. This I actually put in my course so that the students can see how everything is mapped. I share a key so that they know what the coding stands for. And then it has the course objectives and it guides them along. So hopefully by the end, when they read that, they understand how everything is connected. Let me show you how this would look in a course. So here's a course. This is an introductory page to a module. In this introductory page, and this is a demo course, so not everything is up to date in it, but I share with them the objectives for the learning unit, and then I put the module map in at the bottom so they can see how everything is related. So in this case, if you clicked on the home page, and the students would come in here, this is their module, and they would begin the module here. And it gives them an introduction, kind of an overview of the module, their resources, and then that module map is built right in. And that's how I use the module maps in the courses. And this has worked very well for us. I know, so is there a question? Okay. But this has worked really well. It's a little bit easier to manage a module map than it is working an entire course map. I know that full course maps are done, and they're done very well. But when we started working at how do we make sure our unit is aligned, once we got through the making sure all of the module level objectives were supporting the course level objectives, it became so much easier to manage the data at the module level in an individual module map for every unit. So that's kind of the direction that we're going. The feedback that I've gotten is that this is a lot easier to check. It's a lot easier to adjust. So if you change an assignment, if I wanted to take this assignment away, I know which module level objectives I'm meeting. I can look up here and see which course level objectives they align with to make sure that if I just remove this altogether, that I'm not going to miss something. So this actually is course level objective number 9, not module objective number 9. So if I took this out, I may not have anything else that's going to help me meet this course level objective, and my alignment could be broken. so I just want to make, that is a very nice way to do your module map, because then you can easily edit it, see how all the pieces are related for you as well, and then make sure that the students can see that connection too. That way also they know that they're not necessarily doing busy work. In addition, sometimes in my assignment, so if I'm asking them to do the case study, I will say, this is going to help you meet the following objectives. And I will remind them in the assignment that this assignment is helping them with meeting those objectives. Any questions about doing a module map at this point?
We do not have any open questions right now.
Okay. I'm going to share a couple of resources. So one of the resources I'd like to share is, I got some of this information. This is the Quality Matters website. This is the website that's open to the public. You do not have to be a member of QM to go to this site, but they have a resource center. And in their resource center, I just put in course map, and it brought up several different presentations that they had done. Course map on the road. This is a Prezi that's out there. And then let's see. This is a wonderful site. They actually have a course mapping template that you can view. They have handouts on learning objectives and some handout on alignment. Here is their poster presentation. It is pretty busy, but this would make a nice handout to have, or possibly even print. If you have a teaching and learning center, the handout just starts, identify your course, write your course objectives, identify your modules, write your module objectives, and then it goes on for the other steps of alignment. But I just wanted to point out that resource. A lot of people don't realize that you can go to the different resources for QM, even if you're not necessarily a member. But that's an excellent resource. And I think this is also where they've gone through to make sure, in this case, they've gone through the learning objectives, and they've put a yes or no to where it allows faculty to revise or edit their learning objective. It's a pretty good handout as well. So that is really it for what I needed to present. Are there questions regarding alignment or writing objectives?
It doesn't look like we have anything out there right now. I know a couple people have had to drop off. If anybody wants to follow up with you, Dana, would you mind sharing your contact info?
Sure. I can put my email in the chat, and I will also send some of my resources. And I kind of apologize. I was trying to use a new tool today because I thought that would make it easier to understand. But I hope that I was able to share at least some information that helped along the way and gave you some ideas on how to do some module mapping and some checking on alignment and stuff like that as well.
I think it was a great presentation, and it is a big topic. There's a lot to cover, and I think you gave us a great overview of it. And I know that this is something that we could probably talk about, and have a 2 or 3 day workshop just on course objectives and mapping. And I know a lot of institutions have been doing that and have pretty, firm guidance on course learning objectives. And so some of that is going on within our state. So Dana, thanks again for your presentation today. It was great and really useful information. For everyone that was able to join us this afternoon, thanks for taking the time out and learning something that hopefully will help in your online courses. Hopefully, I'm hoping that you'll be able to join us tomorrow afternoon for syllabus curb appeal. If you have questions about syllabi for your online courses, this is going to be presented by Tracy Fairless at UCO, and she's going to share some of her expertise about developing syllabi. So Dana, thanks again. Thanks everybody for joining, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.